All right, we're live, folks, here live in Portland, Oregon, Pacific Northwest. Thankful to be here with all of you. My name is Jeremy Qualls. I'm part of the pastoral team here at Rose Church, and I am going to be walking us through some of our midweek dive this week. This is our second week of a midweek dive in which we get to hear from some of our great leadership team about their thoughts surrounding Pastor Andrew's message from this last weekend. And so, like I said, my name is Jeremy. I'm with the pastoral team. Here I have Trent Standard. Trent, how long have you been involved with Rose Church?
Since the beginning.
Since the dawn of time.
Literally.
The beginning was Trent.
Pastor Andrew will frequently bring up how the church began in his mother-in-law's living room, and I was there for it.
Mommy7Beth on Instagram,
yes,
for those of you wondering.
Yeah, it's a great follow. Yeah, great follow. But yeah, Pastor Andrew and Julia were my youth pastors. It's how I met my beautiful wife to the left of me here. But my wife and I are part of the leadership team. We do host team. You've probably seen us. We pass out buckets, help people get seated in the house of the Lord.
The hostess with the mostest.
Yes.
Is his high school nickname. So you're a part of the host team, and
Yes.
you lead that alongside of your bride,
Yes.
Janet Standard. Janet, what is your history associated with the house of the Lord?
Yeah, so I have been here since the boss, Andrew and Julia, like Trent said, were
Blow
our youth
Pony World
pastor.
Headquarters as well.
We are also team leads of the host team, and I'm also doing RLC.
Good deal. And RLC, for those of you who don't know, is our Rose Leadership College.
Woo!
You're going to be our first alumnus.
Yeah.
Is alumni.
Alumni.
There
Yeah,
it is.
yeah, yeah.
And so that just started this week. How's that going?
It's been absolutely phenomenal. Pastor Andrew, Pastor Steve, Pastor Barbara have already shared so much. I've learned so much, and I'm so challenged, and I'm so excited for the rest of the semester.
Yeah, and this isn't your first educational stop. So what were you doing prior to Rose Leadership College?
Yeah, so right after I graduated, I did 3 years at UW in Seattle, and then I finished up my last year at WCU in Vancouver. I got a degree in biochem, and I'm not really sure where the directory of my life is going to go, and so that's why I'm doing RLC to figure out some more guidance.
Set a foundation.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. Yeah, if you have not checked out Rose Leadership College, you should. We are in the inaugural year, and great things to come.
Yeah.
And so we also have Roxanne Tyler.
Hello.
Hello. What is your involvement in Rose Church?
I am on the prayer team, so I am praying for all of you guys.
A prayer
I love
warrior
your
of
prayer
sorts.
texts every week. They're
Thank you.
truly
I do
the
send out
best.
prayer texts.
Truly the
so.
best. I love them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You're part of the prayer team.
Yes.
So when we get those prayer and praise cards, she is among those that it goes to. A prayer warrior of sorts.
I am here.
Yeah. Thank you for what you do.
Yeah.
We very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
So tonight, midweek dive, week 2. Last week, you got to hear from a number of different leaders in different areas of the church. And tonight, you're stuck with us. So we're in week 2 of Into the Wilderness. Week 1 was phenomenal, although it was 9,000 degrees in this building. It was the hottest service I've been in since the 90s.
It was pretty hot.
Yeah.
So, the following week was much better, much more sustainable temperatures, thank the Lord. And now we're in week 2 of Into the Wilderness. So Pastor Andrew is basically walking us through a series of talks surrounding how we go through seasons of wilderness, or maybe seasons where we don't see the fruit of God's hand in our life.
Yeah.
And so he broke that down into kind of 4 subtopics within this last week's message that we're going to unpack for you a little bit tonight. So it was provision, it was perspective, it was praise, and it was pace. So Janet, why don't you get started on provision?
So I feel like in the wilderness, God provides in so many ways that you don't expect. For example, when I was going to college, I was working like 3 part-time jobs, serving, busting tables all day long, just trying to, get an education. And I was praying and praying and praying for, I was in such a time where I was like, I have zero energy to do anything else. I went on a limb, applied for this internship and a couple of scholarship, and I was like, if I get any of these, like, this is insane. At that time, I was super diligent with just like faithfulness with my money and like tithing and all those things, and so I knew that God would provide for me somehow.
Right.
And then once I got a call, I got all the scholarships I applied for and the internships, and now I have like pretty much no student debt. And so that has been such an amazing, just see how God worked in my life in that way. And through that wilderness and so many other wilderness in my life, how God just had to provide with friendships and just abundance of things. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And you can't understate the consistency of God's faithfulness and God's provision. Is that like, even what I wish I could do is always go back to the times when I was the most concerned about God's provision.
Yeah.
And I wish I could go and say like, hey, like, it's going to be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Just trust that. But that's sort of part of the process, is this journey of trust, I suppose, that we're trying to take from the wilderness.
Right.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Oh,
Go for it.
no, go.
Really? Thank you, Roxanne. So, Matthew chapter 4, where Jesus is tempted. Before he's tempted, he was baptized in the river, and the Bible talks about how the heavens opened up, the Spirit of the Lord descended upon him like a dove, and things like that. And it's a very stark contrast. Jesus essentially goes from being anointed to then like attacked by the devil.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the name of the preacher who said it, but I heard somebody say one time that you see how big God is in the river, but then how big he is inside of you when you're in the desert. And this story shows us just how big God was within Jesus. Obviously, he is God, but how he trusted beyond a shadow of a doubt that God would supply everything that he needed. And through him resisting what the devil was trying to throw his way and get him to cling on to, Bob talks about how the angels came and fed him after he had resisted temptation, and they took care of him.
Yeah. And I was talking with you about this before, and you had mentioned like a really good point regarding like Jesus had all of the attributes of God. So he was omniscient.
Yeah.
He was all powerful. He had the means to provide for himself. And still, Jesus himself chose to submit to his relationship to God and trust God's timing above his own.
Yeah.
So even within the Trinity, we still see Jesus choosing to submit to the timing of the Father when it comes to provision.
Yeah. And he could have done things his way if he wanted to. And it makes me think of when Jesus was on the cross and they were saying, hey, if you're the Son of God, get down off the cross. And I'm thankful that Jesus decided to not, once again, take part in that temptation, but stayed on the cross and died for us.
The Bible tells us he experienced every temptation that we do.
Yeah.
So there's nothing new under the sun, and Jesus is the perfect example, like of what it looks like to walk blameless in the sight of temptation.
Yeah.
Roxanne, what do you take away from that?
So my husband and I have been married for 10 years, and within those 10 years, and even when we were dating, life happens and things happen, and it's been a consistent thing that God is good. You know what I mean? Like, in any which way that we turn, or any which way where the enemy will try to pull us one way or the other, we always find that God is centering us, and he's like holding us, and he's anchoring us down so that we would be able to have nothing but his praise and his glory surrounding us. So I've just been so thankful that not everyone has the opportunity to have that established within their families, or to have that be brought up. So I've been thankful that Jeremy and I had that set foundation from like our parents and our grandparents, so then we would have a sort of foundation to grow upon.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And like kind of the reoccurring theme that I hear surrounding provision is this idea that God's provision is going to take place. So it's more of like our emotional response to that reality of like the circumstances surrounding me would tell me not to have faith, would tell me not to
Right.
trust, would tell me not to believe in the providing hand of God, but I have to do something in my spirit to change my outlook on it. And that's what, that just segues into the next point in Pastor Andrew's message, is talking about your perspective. And I think, like, when I think of wilderness seasons, I used to almost resent them because I didn't understand they were as natural a part of our human existence as the times of abundance or the times of plenty. Is that, like, there is something that takes place in our spirit that is still a positive thing in light of our whole life in the negative seasons too. So we can't just live this constant life of ever expanding, like, we only ever get better and we only ever experience more and more and more. Is that we have to also learn, how do we trust God, or how do we keep a good perspective in the times of lack and difficulty? And, you know, for me, I think that the perspective piece of, like, zooming out on the situation, and I would stop asking myself why things were happening to me, and instead I would start asking myself, what is this trying to teach me? And it changes you from being a victim to a circumstance to empowered to change your circumstances. And that's the power that God gives us through his word. And so, I mean, how about any of you, like, in terms of perspective in a season of wilderness?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like perspective is such a huge thing in general, with life, spiritually, in marriage and friendships, and definitely having that perspective in a low point. Like I said, Jeremy and I have been married for 10 years, and we've had life happen to us. My mom got sick. We've been going through a journey of infertility, adopting, and still continuing that process right now. And then Jeremy also had gotten sick as well. And so each of those times, just having that perspective. I love how you said, you know, taking kind of like zooming out, and you can, I mean, it's so much easier said than done.
In hindsight, it's really easy, guys.
But in the times when you're like sitting down, I'm like crying, my dog's with me, trying to figure out what's going on in life. And
Like in the Taco Bell line. It's
really
like, it's in
the
between
Taco
after
line.
you've ordered and, like, you're going up to pay your $30 for just you.
Just give me the food for free.
God, why right now?
But it is crazy. The enemy will definitely try to have not only like try to like have, even if it's just like what you see on social media or what you see on TV or what other friends may be going through or what they have, what you don't have. It is crazy, and it is a blessing at the same time to have that relationship with God and to know that your perspective is just like this. You know what I mean?
Definitely,
You need to sit down and pray. When I am in a bad mood, I like, Jay, I need time. Let me eat something and let me pray is usually what I need to do to be in a better mood.
Yeah.
And I feel like having that moment with God and being able to change that perspective, it really sets the tone, not only for yourself, but for the people surrounding you.
Yeah.
I know when I go into work in a bad mood and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to like listen to Kirk Franklin or something.
Right.
Yeah.
It changes the atmosphere overall. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But even in a practical sense, perspective is going to dictate your next step. So whatever perspective you have, your actions will therefore follow that. And so just even really practical speaking, like if I have a really bad perspective on this, I'm probably going to act harsher. I'm probably going to be ruder. I'm probably going to be X, Y, and Z. But if I come in and shift that mindset and shift that perspective to, holiness, righteousness, gracefulness, patience, I automatically go into the room so much more nicer to Trent, so much more graceful to Trent. And so I even think on just scaling back and just being very practical with ourselves, that perspective will dictate your next step. And
Your
so,
experience.
and your experience.
I think that's why worship and prayer is so important too. When you are flying in an airplane and you look out, you just notice how small things are and how insignificant they are. And I think that when you get into the secret place and you're intentional with your worship and prayer, it really helps the things that seem super big and daunting in your life not really be as big and daunting as you thought they once were, because you're looking at it through the lens of how God sees it. And that's even my prayer for myself and Janet in our marriage, but just when we interact with anybody, is that we want to see people, ourselves especially, the way that God sees us, and to have a heavenly perspective. And I think that worship and prayer really helps you acquire that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like a really practical question that has really helped me, and it's something that you touched on, Roxanne, of it's important to think about the time value of your emotions or the time value of your attitudes. Right. So you talked about like, you made a recognition of your attitude in a moment and then made a decision to change.
Yeah.
And that gap of time for me is different every single day. Sometimes I get so frustrated when like 2 hours of a day go by, and then I identify the bad attitude that took place for 2 hours. Right. I think the beauty of our relationship with God and the empowering of the Holy Spirit in this scenario is taking that from 2 hours to 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Is that like, yes, it's okay to have negative emotions. It's okay to have a bad attitude. Acknowledge it and then change it. Right. And so that you're not wasting, like, the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I wasted seasons of my life, not hours of my life, seasons of my life, absent of enacting God's, like disciplines into my own life, but rather just being a slave to my attitude and emotions for seasons.
Right.
Yeah.
And then once it clicked is that like, what is within my control actually is my attitude. Like I don't have to park on negative emotions all the time.
Yeah.
And then I can change my activity and I could do something different the next day. That's when like the practical power of the Holy Spirit really starts to play out from a perspective standpoint.
Yeah.
And like you said, and it just goes, into a very well-crafted talk by Pastor Andrew this weekend of like praise. It's a practical weapon to change your perspective. And I know that's something that you have experienced time and again. What's been your personal experience with praise?
Yeah. I think one of the things that have definitely stood out in mine and Jeremy's marriage and in our life is trying to conceive. And, years ago we had a miscarriage, and then we had a failed adoption, and then life just continues, right? I have these emotions, and I'm like good one day, and then one day I'm like just down in sorrow. But at the end of the day, I have to realize and count my blessings and be thankful and have just tremendous amount of praise for God. Through all of that, I feel like we have been blessed to have friends and family that have children, and that they're allowing us to be, I'm everyone's TT, so.
I can attest.
Yes.
My children know her as that.
But it's been an amazing growth for myself, for my growth with my relationship with God, and, just a testimony for Jeremy and I. Mm-hmm. And when I do mention this to people, or when people do come to me and ask me, they're like, how can you be around other moms or be around other pregnant people? And it doesn't even faze me. I feel like why wouldn't I want to be surrounded by God's blessings?
Yeah.
Like it's just because I can't, not that I can't, because I know that God will bless Jeremy and I, but I feel like, why be bitter by someone else's blessing? We need to grow in that, and we need not to be bitter and stuck in like, okay, because I don't have this doesn't mean that I can't be happy for someone else that has something, you know what I mean? And so that's definitely been something that we've grown with, and that we've are still acquiring and challenging ourselves just to be happy and to be praising for God's glory. So, yeah.
I think that's great. Like that idea that like praise is rooted in gratitude. And I think that's where like if I could say the core element of what either keeps my attitude good or changes my attitude, it's always about either I'm pissed off about what I don't have, or I'm thankful for what I do have.
Right.
And it's like, that is literally the root question of like, will I praise God for even if there is no evidence of blessing in my life?
Yeah.
And if Jesus dying on the cross was it, and that was all I had,
Right.
am I willing to have a life disposition of gratitude as a response to only that one?
Yeah.
And then from there, it's like it becomes easier to identify the blessings of God that is working in your life above and beyond just the basics.
Yeah.
And you've experienced that in your life as well. I mean,
Yeah.
we're in a similar work environment, and keeping a good attitude is important throughout
Yeah.
the workday.
Yeah. One of the mottos of our work is activity plus attitude equals success. And it's
Well, now they found me out.
it's so important. It's critical. And I think just as you said just a second ago, Jeremy, having a disposition that I'm going to be thankful and grateful regardless. I think we can all look back on times in our lives where the hand of God was at work, though we did not see it.
Yeah.
And I think about what might have happened had I not been persistent with prayer and worship and keeping Jesus at the center.
Yep.
And thank God, though I can't always, and we sing that song, I think it's called Miracle Worker.
Yeah.
Even when I can't see it, you're working. And that's what I think keeps me sane or encourages me when I'm down in the dumps, is that I know, even if I can't see it or feel it, I'm not going to live by that.
Right.
I'm going to walk in faith, not by sight, not what I can see and what I can feel, but trusting in the character of God that he's doing something, even though I might not see the ramifications of it right now. I'm going to look back in a day or two or a year or so and see that something was actually happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's a long-term perspective.
Yep,
right?
totally.
Is
Sure.
that God is not in a rush.
Right.
We are.
Yes.
Like, God has eternity in mind. We have the next 7 days in mind.
Right,
That's about
yeah.
as far as I plan. I plan longer. What I would say, praise, and we'll get into like this idea of prayer as well. Like in my mind, I view like praise and prayer and meditation as like this same like spiritual discipline. It's like a
Right.
practical
Yeah.
discipline
Yeah.
for us to control our tongue, to control our attitude, to control our mind, will, and emotions. And I used to like going back to the conversation earlier where I'd be like, oh man, I wish I could tell Jeremy 2 years ago
Yeah.
that everything was going to be okay. And that's like that's regret, right?
Right.
Like that is the emotion of regret.
Yeah.
And so there was a quote that has messed with me for some time, and it really has only started to play itself out in my life more recently. But like we all experience one of two pains. We either experience the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. So we decide. So
Yeah.
like time is going to pass. Are we going to get something out of that time or not? It's
Yeah.
up to us.
Right.
And so as opposed to Jeremy looking back 2 years and being like, oh, like, woe is you, Jeremy, 2 years ago. I wish you knew. Now I'm going the other direction. I'm asking advice from myself 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Asking advice from myself 20 years from now.
Right.
60-year-old Jeremy, who I want to be in ability to enjoy life at 60, what do I want you to be doing today to make sure that that happens?
Yeah.
So we reverse engineer regret, and we just start looking towards the future, because that's what God has asked us to do in the first place,
Yeah.
is that we're trusting that something better is ahead. And then our life today starts to play itself out with the disciplines that God has given us to actually practically change our life with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even as you're saying that, so I wasn't raised up in a church, and I don't think I got saved until I was maybe 15 or 16 years old. And so this new practice of praising when you're in the wilderness was new. Like my whole life, I didn't grow up with that, so like I didn't know. So I was like, when people were praising through the wilderness, I was like, what is this? This God, like really, he's gonna provide? Like that's just how I was. I was a really bitter, angry child, and I just did not understand. And even then, even 16, 17, 18, like I knew the truth, and there would be times in the wilderness where I didn't do it. Like I didn't praise.
Right.
I didn't praise the
Yeah.
right thing. I didn't do the right thing. And now looking back, where now I have praise through our current wilderness and my current things and mine and Trent's relationship, I can count like night and day difference, like of the magnitude of just like what I have experienced, and just learning on how to praise through when you don't want to. And I think what you said, Jer, was like completely right. It's discipline. It's because half the time when you're in the wilderness, you don't want to do it. And so having the community around you and having friends to encourage you and call you out and call you above is one of the biggest things for me personally, and why I kept on praising through my wilderness. Yeah.
One thing to add to that too, it's not a coincidence that Satan wanted in this story more than anything Jesus' worship, because Satan himself knows the power and impact that it has of like
misplaced worship.
Exactly, because we're all worshiping something,
Yeah.
right? Some of us worship money, some of us worship success.
We were talking about this on the car right here.
Yeah, we were.
Of like what it's easy to identify what you have your identity wrapped up in based
Yeah.
on your
Right.
emotional response towards
Yep.
it potentially not being a part of your life anymore.
Yeah.
So like, are you too wrapped up in money? Well, ask yourself if you could live poor.
Yeah.
And like, could you
Yeah.
do it or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like, what is your emotional response to that? Well, like, I think I could survive. Okay, so that's probably not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But you've removed your identity from that piece.
Yeah.
And then we put our identity back in Christ. So that can
Yeah.
be any number of things. Like I used to wrap up, people will find this comical, in my ability to play basketball as a
You're a great hooper.
hyper athletic 5'9", really good high school athlete. But like my emotions would ride literally on
Mm-hmm.
whether or not I do well in an open gym.
Yeah.
To put it in like 21-year-old Jeremy terms, right? Of like the stupid things we used to just like wrap our
Yeah.
humanity and identity in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're temporary.
Yeah. They're totally
And I think that's
temporary.
what we were referencing there.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a practicality to all of this, just like we were saying, like this idea of like prayer and meditation and praise as a spiritual discipline. In large part, in every major religion, you're going to see the same spiritual practices of like prayer, meditating, setting your minds on things above. But in Christianity, we have a different why, and we have God reaching out to man.
Yeah.
And it is God giving us the means to then actually change our wilderness season. And so I think a practical way that God has done that for us is challenging the pace in which we live our life. So Trent, what are your thoughts surrounding life pace?
Yeah. Timing is everything. And in this story that we read in Matthew chapter 4, Satan offers, obviously, all of the kingdoms of the world to Jesus were he to bow down and worship him. And Jesus was king of all of it and was going to inherit it, but he had to take on the cross first before he did. And Satan offered him a shortcut, essentially. And it is so important to not shortcut the process, because it's not necessarily that having the kingdoms of the world was a bad or wrong thing, because they're obviously Jesus's, but in the wrong time, it is
Right.
the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think God's responses to a lot of our wants and needs is either yes, no, or not right now. And I think one of the greatest things that God can do is say not right now, so he checks our pace.
Yeah.
And we're not getting ahead of ourselves, because if we were to shortcut a wilderness season, like you talked about earlier, we might not get something out of it that we desperately need, that we might need in the next wilderness season. And we saw not the Egyptians, but we saw the Israelites repeating the same mistakes over and over and
Right.
over again. And because you can make an argument, they were trying to shortcut the process.
Trying to take things in their own hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bible tells us, like, bottom line is when we become a believer, he changes the desires of our hearts. So, like, God changes our system of priority. So, like, the world tells us to value a destination, and God is telling us to value the journey.
Yeah.
That there is more reward from the journey than there is in any destination. That what God is trying to create in you
Right.
is far greater than anything that he's trying to give you externally.
Yeah.
So like the blessing or favor of God's hand in my life is a byproduct of me choosing to continue in God's disciplines every day,
Yeah.
regardless if I see
Right.
him or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like for me, I think once again, going back to perspective of like zooming out, pace is challenged in the world we're in today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, go as hard as you can for as long as you can, forever until you die. And we're keeping people alive a long time. But God tells us to take a Sabbath. God tells us to take a break and value rest. And so how has that played out in either one of your lives?
Yeah, I feel like pace is something that I've always dealt with. I always want it my way, my time, and how I think and how I process that it should be, right?
Yeah.
Like I wanted to be married. I wanted to have kids. I wanted to have like all these lists of things. And sometimes it just, how you were saying, that journey. I feel like my mom, she got sick. We went through the miscarriage, and then we had to fill adoption, and then Jeremy got sick as well. And so,
One thing after another.
yeah, it felt like it was a lot happening. But
How many years was that over the course of?
Oh, I want to say maybe it was 4 years.
Yeah.
It was
a lot.
It was like all back to back. Like I would come up, breathe, and then something happened. Come up, breathe, and something happened. But I am so grateful. I don't think how you were saying, like, with regret, I don't think I would have changed anything.
Right.
Though I had gone through those pains and those sufferings and, you know, those late night thinkings or even questioning God, I wouldn't change that now because I wouldn't have that relationship with my mom. I wouldn't have that type of
Right.
relationship with my husband. And I wouldn't definitely not have that relationship with God. And being able to realize that time is not in my hands and
Yeah.
time is in his hands. And I know that sounds cliche, or it just sounds like, that sounds like weird to say,
Yeah.
but I am so enjoying the life that I am living, and I'm so enjoying the pace that it comes at. Sometimes weeks fly by, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Jay, what happened?
Yeah.
The whole weekend went by so fast. Or, oh my gosh, I feel like I've been at work for weeks, and it's only been 8 hours.
And it's 10 a.m. on Monday.
So I am just trying to find, like, Pastor Andrew did such an amazing job because I
Yeah.
feel like this whole last Sunday, those 4 points are such a reality check.
And
And
Yeah.
it's such a practical
Logical.
way.
They build on each other. Yeah.
And I feel like being able to have that and having a community of friends to be like, okay, Rox, like,
Yeah.
this is speeding up too fast, or
Right.
hey, let me help you and lift you up in this area,
Right.
or hey, you need to be more open. And I have friends that push me and say, no, you need to, like, pray more,
Yeah.
or you need to be nicer to Jeremy, or you need to
Oh.
have, like, a better attitude at work.
I love. Oh yeah, me too.
No, but it's true.
But it's so nice to have this type of community here at Rose, and to have that be such a foundation
Yeah.
for my marriage and for my relationship with God by, like, separately. And I feel like that's definitely been helping.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like you can't overstate the value of community. I think that's the beautiful part of, like, both Rose and just, like, friend groups that I know that exist within Rose. There's, like,
Yeah.
sub communities that
Yeah.
are really a beautiful representation of the body of Christ. And that's what we are asked to do. Like it says, as one man sharpens another, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another.
Yeah.
Like we are meant to continue
Right.
to refine these ideas to make them foundational to who we are. And I would heavily encourage everyone that you protect that at all costs, that
Yeah.
perspective, and that you keep people around who speak life into your future and
Right.
speak vision and, like, speak the promises of God over your life, believing them with you, and not, like, tearing down at, the vision that God has given you to build for your life, even though maybe right now may not be
Yeah.
evidence of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have something to add?
Yeah, and even I think like another practical thing, like trusting God's pace on like forgiving someone, or like I feel like I should be like, oh, I should have forgave that person by now. Why do I still have all this bitterment, this anger, and all these things towards this
Right.
person? And then you start to get like so down on yourself because you should be at a certain phase time, like area in your life or whatnot because of that. So I even think like with time, with God's time, like sometimes I feel like I'm literally in slow-mo with this kind of stuff because I'm like, God, like I'm over it. Like I'm totally over it. I don't want to deal with it anymore. Like I've like gone through the motions. I've like
And
done.
then you see him on Instagram. There she is.
And it's true, and like and it's convicting, and I feel like with God, like you really have to trust that I eventually will get to the end of forgiveness. I will
Yeah.
eventually, not be bitter. I'll eventually like, move on past this part of my life, and I think like trusting God, praising through that, and knowing that He's going to give you the provision of forgiveness, so you could do that, has been like such a journey in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like trusting God with the timing of your own personal character development as well.
Right.
Yeah. I think a common trait of many of my friends is that we're all our own worst critic.
Yeah.
Is
For
that like
sure.
we're way harder on ourselves than literally anyone in the entire universe is. But I think that's just, there you go, is the importance of kind of changing that mental narrative so that your voice begins to sound like the voice of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's part of it too, is that like the tone we take with ourselves and the way we go about this internal narrative, I think God is trying to change it into that still small voice of like that consistent voice of encouraging, that consistent voice of like letting you know that like disciplines are a good thing and it will pay off over the long run.
Yeah.
But that goes back to pace.
Yeah.
You're not going to hear God, a still small voice, when you're trying to fly through the weeks as fast as you can.
Yeah.
And like I joked about it, but like I'll delete Instagram for hours at a time to make sure I don't get triggered by like some like, oh, I went to high school with that guy and now I'm cooler than him. Yeah, so that actually happens. But no, that's pretty much all the time we have tonight. Thank you guys so much
Yeah.
for joining. I can't say enough how much all of you mean to Rose Church and to the people involved. And so thank you for joining us tonight. Make sure to tune in this weekend, 10 o'clock on YouTube, and I'm sure all kinds of other platforms that I'm unaware of because I'm really bad with technology. So I wish you all the best, and I hope you have a great night.